Hello, 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 and welcome back to That Quirky Bird Girl. I'm your host, Steph. This time, though, I'm joining you from my YouTube page. If you came here for my podcast episode, so happy to have you here. So lucky. I am here to talk about a book that I'm reading, and it is called The Genius. Oh, golly. Genius of Birds. So I have attempted to read this book many a times, and it's not a book problem, it's a me problem. I will admit to that. And I'm ready to overcome it with you all. So we're going to go through the end half of chapter 1. And if you haven't seen my recap of chapter 1, the other half is on my podcast, That Quirky Bird Girl. So be sure to check that out if you haven't already. I've also uploaded it to this page, so you can check it out. But I don't know, Spotify and Apple gives you a rundown and also a notification when I post a new episode. So love that. Check that out. All right. So we're going to talk about the genius of birds and the second part of this book, or second part of this chapter. I left off roughly on page 31 for those of you that have also read this book, but it's a great book and I recommend you to read it if you haven't read it. Or you can read it along with me. Great motivation. Perfect. Okay, so the first thing, and actually before I dive in, let's talk about our chapters. So I've layered them over here, and there are 3 sections that I want to talk about specifically in the end half of chapter 1. The first one is our ability to lean into some flexible thinking. So I talked a little bit about this on my podcast episode, but I want to get into it a little bit more because I think there's some things that I didn't say that I want to actually add onto. Our second chapter is not judging a book by its cover. And I know this has been around for a long time, and Jennifer Ackerman doesn't specifically say the analogy that I'm going to make, but I think it's important to make it. And also, specifically for my audience, we talk a lot about healing and healing through birds and what can be done to learn and grow and adapt in the context of our birds. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And the last part is actually just kind of a funny thing that I noticed as I was reading this. And I want to point it out for you all because I think it's silly. And then there's just a little bonus piece that I want to acknowledge about the amazing work that is Jennifer Ackerman's. I'll get into that. I'll save it. So stay tuned. Watch the full video. All right, so let's dive into flexible thinking. Now, if you're curious what flexible thinking is, it's our ability to adapt when new challenges or new problems arise and lean into some trial and error, some testing like a little scientist, and our ability to implement those and then also bounce back. So it includes a lot of resilience, strength, your ability to test and be aware of what those testing outcomes can be from a more. And one thing I actually really, really appreciated that Jennifer Ackerman calls out specifically is the fact that, I'll read the line that she says. If one of the species you're using in your experiment fails every test you give it, the problem may be you. And I don't necessarily think that this only applies with birds. I think there are a lot of ways that we can apply this to ourselves too, unfortunately. And the reason why I say that is because there have been times in my life where I have felt so stuck. And so the way that she goes about calling this out is by talking about experiments that involve grass quits, which are a bird in the Bahamas. And she talks about how studies may not necessarily be tailored towards their strengths. And that leads us right into my next point that I want to make, or the point that Jennifer Ackerman makes, and I'm going to draw on a little bit. So we go into the next few pages, and she starts talking about how birds will do unusual things given unusual conditions. So one example that she makes of this is of a gray kingbird. So traditionally kingbirds, they're insect lovers. However, when there was a massive storm they would dive down and eat the fish that were in this little pond, and they were just like an easy catch, right? That is an analysis done in the natural setting of the bird, so not necessarily taking them out of their own environment, but testing them or analyzing their behavior within the context of their own behavior, own environment. And the problem with this is that most studies, or at least it seems from what she's saying, is that most studies are actually done in the context of a lab. Now, when I even think about myself, for example, if I'm sitting and taking a test, or if let's give the example of taking a test. And it's my first time in this room. It's my first time being tested on this material. As someone who has struggled with ADHD literally my whole life, it is so, so hard to sit and be an exam. And I can just imagine, again, this is me personifying birds. If you're new to my page, I do tend to do this. And the reason why I do this is because I think there are lessons that we can take away from birds. I think it's important. If I were to be taken into a room and be tested on something, I would probably fail. Genuinely, I would probably fail because, and it's not, even if I was tested on something like birds, even though I may have the knowledge and the acumen and the ability to communicate it, I'm a hyper communicator if you haven't realized, but I have found it so difficult to just be thrown into a brand new environment and know how to somehow navigate or have the ability to solve problems in the way that I would naturally be able to solve problems. Like, for example, if I was sitting on my floor and I was given a task to solve a problem, I can do it much, much, much better than I would be able to do it in a lab or on a table. The first time that I put together a Lego set was recently, and it was such an amazing experience. And I'm going to be buying more because I loved it so much. But the thing is that if I was sat in a room and given a Lego set and told, hey, you need to put this all together, I would struggle. I would struggle a lot. I would struggle because of the lighting. I would struggle because of the noise. I would struggle because of the lack of noise. And, there are ways that I have found throughout my life to overcome some of these struggles, but some of them are going to be persistent for the rest of my life. And there's not anything that I can do about them. There's things that I can do better, like wear headphones or not wear headphones or put my hair up or there are a number of different things that I can do today, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to perform the exact same way if I was sitting on my bed floor. So this is when the quote that just stood out so, so, so strong to me while I was reading this, which is, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, ... I can't remember the rest. It's something like it will fail. It's an inaccurate judgment of that animal. So the argument that she seems to be making is that it's not a fair assessment to see how these birds are actually interacting within their own environment. I thought that was really interesting, and I also really, really related to it for the reasons that I said earlier. Oftentimes throughout my life, I have been put up against someone else for comparison's sake, or I have felt like I am not performing in the way that was expected of me because I am taken out of my environment, for example, and I end up feeling so terribly uncomfortable. I make this point because I think it's important for us to talk about the fact that just because you may not be performing in the way that other people might be expecting of you, or you may not be performing in a way that works for you that you are aware of today, I hope that you do find your own natural environment, your natural landscape. For me, it's chilling on my floor. That's where I feel the most safe and the most at home and the most comfortable to be able to take on new tasks and be able to do really anything. Your natural setting is literally what you make of it, similar to the birds. And it may not be the same natural setting as everyone else. You may be a grass quit where you are able, or you're less interested in solving problems and you're more interested in poking at the ground and picking at what you usually do. Or you might be like a Caribbean grackle where they are constantly challenging themselves and constantly looking for something new and willing to risk losing some access to food temporarily, or willing to risk losing. And I think forcing yourself, if you find yourself in one or the other, forcing yourself to be the other is never going to work for you. There were so many times in my life where I really relate to Caribbean grackles. I am someone who is constantly challenging myself and making sure that I am growing along the way. That is who I have always been my whole entire life. And there have been times lately where I felt like I have been forced into a position similar to a grass quit, where I am just head down, keep pecking at the ground. And that is genuinely not who I am. Every single time I've been put in that environment, I've wanted to swiftly kick myself out because it just hasn't worked for me. I'm not the type of person that can just sit and be quiet and can just get on to get on. That's just not who I am. So surrounding myself with people who understand that I'm going to be a challenger, I'm going to be someone who is constantly evolving, and I may show up completely different one day to the next. They may look at me one day and say, oh wow, she's so strong, she's so resilient. And then the next day I'm falling apart because I have a brand new challenge that I've thrown myself at that I now feel like is questioning my worth. And I go through this cycle of just getting excited and challenging and wanting to do something new and changing and evolving and growing. And then sometimes I get down, like we're working on it, But I think figuring out what type you are, what type of person that you are, and if it helps to relate it to birds, again, I say this all the time, make the comparison because it will, like it has for me, I hope that it will help you in growing and in understanding yourself more. And then if at the end of that, you need to take a step back and just say, okay, these are birds. I am me though, and this is who I am. That's great. I love that for you. And I love that she calls this out and makes this point because I think it's really important for us to remind ourselves that we are not like everyone else. That's easy to see from the outset because obviously we don't look like each other. Everyone has their own unique look and their own unique vibe that they carry with them. But reminding yourself that just like the birds, you are unique and you can express that and you can find ways of living that meet your own uniqueness. I think that's really exciting and that's such a beautiful journey. And I hope that you enjoy along the way getting to know who you are, because whether you're a grass quit or whether you're a Caribbean grackle, what you have to share, your story, what you carry with yourself is so, so, so valuable. And I cannot wait to learn more about it. So if you find yourself relating to either the grass quit or the Caribbean grackle, I want you to throw it in the comments down below and let me know what you think about this comparison. Or if there's another bird, if there's a third, fourth, fifth, not everything's so binary. You can find any bird that you relate to socially. If you find that you're more like an American crow where you rely on large groups and you find that the intelligence really drives you forward in other areas of your life, then do just that. But find the bird. Find the bird, please. And throw it in the cup. One example that she gives before I move on is actually of vultures in South Africa who would wait for gazelles or other animals to run by, and then these little things on the ground would shoot off, and the vultures would then have access to this new food source. And I think there are ways we can take that too and allow ourselves to be a little innovative. Obviously the environment that these vultures are getting the food in, not so great, and what we can take away is actually that you can make something that works for you from something that can be so ugly and has an ugly history. And I hope that you find something that works for you. One of the last things that I want to talk about is something that's brought up on page 35, and it just got me giggling. It was so funny. So basically what Jennifer Ackerman points out is that one of the researchers in this book, so his last name is Lafarbe, Dr. Lafarbe, and he called out that the least intelligent bird is the emu. And ironically enough, I actually did not know this at all. The emu is the national bird of Australia. Now, that is not the funny bit. The funny bit is that there were literally emu wars that were fought against the Australian army against emus, where they were literally chasing them down, causing a lot of harm to the breed. And they become the national bird of Australia. And the reason why they named it the national bird is because they aren't able to walk backwards. Okay, I don't know about y'all, but this felt a little bit of an interesting point because, Okay, they named their national bird the emu because they are not able to go backwards. Does that mean that we can't go backwards and talk about the fact that they literally tried to remove this species from the planet? I just thought that was really interesting and a cool analogy that she called out in the book, but she didn't explicitly talk about the emu wars. I'm adding that piece, but that was really interesting. And then lastly, I think overall, just one thing I wanted to call out with Jennifer Ackerman and what I've read of her book so far is she has this deep, deep, deep appreciation for innovation throughout the bird world. So she talks to a lot of scientists, a lot of ornithologists that are in the field, but it seems like she really spends a lot of time focused on people who are doing science or approaching science and ornithology completely different from how it has been approached in the past. And I think that in order for her to be able to highlight these voices, she too has to be an innovator. And that's something that I see reading. I've read the introduction, I've read chapter 1. So again, it's not very much that I've read, but it's very, very clear to me that Jennifer Ackerman is an innovator and she deeply, deeply cares about birds. And I really value that. And I'm just excited to see where she's going to continue leaning into that throughout this book. This is only chapter 1, but literally what I wrote is she has a deep appreciation for science and innovative thinking because she too is an innovative thinker. I think this is the perfect book to get started with the series about birds on, and I'm going to continue posting videos about the chapters. So up next, we have chapter 2, and I will be uploading those across my podcast as well as here on YouTube. So if you want to see more of that content, be sure to subscribe. Follow me over on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. All of the links are in my bio. And leave a comment to share something you appreciated about this book or the next book that we'll be reading together. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you soon. Bye.